Our next guest is no stranger to the cattle industry. His research, opinion pieces, and articles are regular features in the pages of Beef Magazine and other leading publications. Recently, Nevil wrote a white paper about the growth of straight breeding in the industry, exploring new opportunities for quality and profitability in raising cattle. Help me welcome to Kansas City a friend of your breed, Nevil Speer.
Thanks, Tom.
Cheer him up.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's an honor and a privilege, and really it's a treat for me because I get to talk about today probably the thing that I most like to talk about, and that's the beef industry and the fact that we've really got an incredible success story to tell out there. I think actually Eric turned me on to this book, I don't know, about 4 or 5 months ago, and I read it. I'm not a great storyteller per se, but I think it's just a really appropriate title as we begin to think about our business and where we are and where we've been. Whoever tells the best story wins. And I just heard a theme through here right towards the end of that panel discussion that really owns our business right now, and that's confidence. And what a great story that we have to tell about entrepreneurialism and markets and really about business success and grit. I think what we have to tell in here is probably one of the greatest stories there is in terms of a business study. Unfortunately, business schools don't understand agriculture enough, so they won't do that. But this is really just an incredible time to be in our business, and it's an incredible feeling to have that, that sense of confidence that we walk around with right now as we talk about that. I think, though, in order to understand the story of success and where we are, it's pretty important to understand where we've been, right? From whence you come. So let's talk a little bit about that because I think it tells us something about the transition and what's happened. I love to show this slide. It's one of my favorites, but it delineates spending at the consumer level between 1980 and 1998. And what happened was beef gained $10 in new spending over that roughly 20-year period. Meanwhile, the competition, pork and poultry, gained about $110. So 11-to-1 advantage. Now, Tom Brink just mentioned something that's so important. He talked about top-line growth, right? We want to grow revenue because if we don't have more revenue coming in, and we're a consumer-oriented product, if we don't have more money coming in, there's no opportunity to grow the business. And we essentially went through 20 years with no new money coming into the business. Consumers were not spending more for beef. They were opting in favor to spend money on pork and poultry. We got left behind. And what was concerning about all of that is we begin to do the National Beef Quality Audits, and you start looking at the top quality challenges that came through, and there's a theme there, 91, 95, 2000. We're getting beat up on the things that we're supposed to be the very best at. External fat, uniformity, tenderness, marbling. What it all talks about is quality. Why do we eat beef? Because it tastes good. Right? We don't eat pork and poultry necessarily because it tastes good. We eat beef because it tastes good. We were getting beat at the very things that we were supposed to be good at. So I think that through that history, we have some lessons that probably need to be learned, and I've heard these themes discussed today as we've had some conversation and working through all of this. Okay? First of all, beef was working in a commodity mindset, and we're going to talk about that more in detail in just a little bit. But that's really characterized by a very traditional supply chain, and that was part of the panel this morning. Adversarial relationships, win-lose negotiations, short-term focus, cost, no emphasis on value, limited communication, it's very volatile, and most importantly, a commodity mindset is unresponsive to the consumer, to the very entity that is ultimately paying the bills in this business and allow us to do what we do. Unresponsive. And so ultimately what happened in that period between 1980 and 1998, we were losing market share. We were getting our butts kicked in a major way. And that was for any number of reasons. One, we talked about quality and taste. Also, there were some health concerns that we still deal with, convenience, the price-value relationship, and I want to come back to that in just a little bit. And then also, it was really an era of increasing consumer empowerment. Consumers were beginning to change, and they would push back when they could. And they were pushing back on beef, to be certain. And so ultimately something had to change, and I liked what Tom had put up earlier as we were talking about the success story in this business and the story of a steak and what we've done right. But we also have to remember that we can be self-destructive, right? We can begin to have denial, and we certainly heard that through that 20 years. We get some arrogance, some complacency, and Tom talked a lot about that. The competency dependence. We're just going to do what we've always done, volume obsession, and then ultimately this sort of territorial impulse. We're just going to gather what we can. And ultimately, those all create self-destructive habits that will blow up a company and or an industry. And so when we can't respond, ultimately we get beat up and we ended up in a situation like we were. So what had to change is that we had to increase consumer focus. That's some of the discussion you just heard in terms of responsiveness as we go forward. So let's talk just a little bit about what do consumers want? Anytime we go and purchase something, what do we want as consumers? Number one, solve my problem. Don't make it complicated, just solve the problem. Whatever that is, wherever you are, you've got a problem. And so you're purchasing something to fix that. You're thirsty, you need a new pickup, whatever it is, solve my problem. Don't waste my time. Provide exactly what I want, where I want it, when I want it. And then ultimately, as we see consumers more and more time starved, just reduce the number of decisions I have to make. Just let me keep coming back, and I don't have to think about it. I want it to be almost on automatic pilot as we go forward. And so what happens is we begin to think more about solution marketing versus product marketing. And that product marketing is a commodity orientation. It's there because it's cheap, because it's available, because we do it anyway, right? That's that volume obsession and that competence dependence versus a solution where it's an end product orientation. What's on the plate? And more importantly, why is it on the plate? Why are you purchasing what you are? Okay? So we're switching there. And so what we've done as we become more solution-oriented, ultimately we're reversing the value chain. We're becoming more customer-centric, right? Typically what we do in a very traditional value chain is we start with these core competencies, production, cattle, and we just shove it at consumers and sort of stand around, wring our hands, and hope they buy it. Versus the other way around, where we begin to start with the customer, create the right product, and then adapt the value chain and the production chain accordingly. So it's bottom up. It's a complete reversal, but that's ultimately where successful companies and successful industries, where they've arrived to be sure that they can instill that. So then as we talk about all that, it's really about building demand. Now, building demand isn't that hard, right? It's a pretty simple equation, is you want to create more happy customers and fewer unhappy customers. Okay? A lot of times we talk about all of this and we make it pretty complex, but it really isn't. It's just a very enduring kind of a concept as we go forward. And so we talk a lot in this industry about beef demand. Well, let's look a little bit of where we've been. Okay? Typically we use 1990 as the index at 100, and then you'll see where that sharp downward plunge to 1998. And I always like to remind people, those of you that were in the business in 1998 and selling cattle, how awful that was. And then we climbed out of that, and then we reached the financial crisis, and we battled with that, and now we're back up again, okay? And since 2009, we have had a very sharp increase and steady increase in beef demand. Now that is very important because if you remember, it was December 2009 was where we marked the last significant low in the fed cattle market. We traded cattle at $79.20, I think either the first or the second week in December 2009. And now look, see what has happened to beef demand since that point. And we're going to come back to the importance of that in just a minute. What I've got up here is a slide that outlines the annual sales mix, okay? So it's a comprehensive cutout, and these are the annual load counts. So this is just number of loads that go into specific kinds of products. And you'll look at 2008, where I want you to focus, and you'll see that the prime and branded products, it's the one on the top, represented about 9% of the market, okay? And we recognize that the branded products is primarily CAB, especially at that time. And then we had about 21% select, 27% choice, and about 43% just goes ungraded. Those products go out the door, they're not graded, they get sold underneath, significantly underneath the market. Now, fast forward to 2014. Right now, we are running a load count at about 15% prime and branded, so we've increased that at proportion by 6%. Choice is still 27%, and what we've done is we've eaten away at select and ungraded. So we've basically taken the bottom end of the market and shoved it up into the top end, prime and branded. That's important. We're selling more product at the top end of the market. Now, what's also interesting, that's the load count, that's volume. Now let's look at the price signals. Branded premiums, and this is a 52-week moving average, so we're getting rid of the week-to-week noise in all of there. Okay, so these are pretty steady, reliable, year-over-year kinds of premiums. We're still running about $20 premium for a branded product, and then you'll see that prime reaches up there to 50, and it kind of went down for a while and then is back up there, 52-week moving average, annual average, about $50. Now that's pretty incredible when you stop and think about the slide we just looked at, said we're selling more product at prime and branded. Now typically what happens when you shove more of something out the door? The price, the relative price difference is going to go down. These have not only stayed steady, they've gone up. So we're selling more product at the top end of the market, and it's still getting more dollars. That's an incredible story. That's a win-win as we go forward. So what I did is I've taken some data and I've played with this, and you go back and you take the actual sales mix in 2008 versus if you changed it the way they really have. And what's happened is if we had stayed in that 2008 sales mix, we would be giving up approximately $2 billion per year, or about $90 per head for every fed steer and heifer that we sell. It's $100, let's just call it $100 per head. So that difference in the sales mix plus the premiums equates to $100 right off the top for every single fed steer and heifer. Now, then we also know we have premiums on top of that, but that's just on top. Here's another $100 because we've made better quality, higher quality products no matter how bad your fed cattle are, and that's $20 per hundred on a 5-weight steer. So that money ultimately gets funneled all the way back into the ranch. Hugely significant as we talk about the top end of the market. So all of that means and reverts to final demand. It's an economic game changer. We talk about all this, we talk about the consumers, but it really, really does matter. And what's happened is we've done about 20 years of work in this business, and it's made a difference in terms of quality and consistency. We have a more responsive value chain, and what's ultimately happened is we have happier customers. We now have promoters And we've anchored spending in a really challenging time. Talk about that. I thought Tom Brink just made a couple of great points. Within all of that, what we never, ever want to do when you have a high-end product like beef, you buy it because it tastes good, it differentiates itself, you don't want to play in the commodity mix. Now, there's what's referred to as a deterioration commodity trap, okay? Where ultimately your advantage in the marketplace continues to get deteriorated. And what happens is you're trying to play against the rivals, which Tom talked about very well, pork and poultry. What can they do? They have economies of scale, they have a better cost structure, they have a very corporate kind of an experience curve. And even if you could push back simply on a price type of thing, what they do is they just come back even harder, take losses, and try to beat you up in the marketplace. So what do you do when you're in a business that begins to play that kind of game? You turn the trap. And what you try to do is take the other end and put them at the low end of the market. That's the importance of all of these things. When we talk about quality, and prime and branded, and then the premiums, what we've done is we've forced pork and poultry more towards the lower end. Beef has worked its way to the upper end. And we've seen that. We continue to see beef's pricing power be evident during the last 4 or 5 years. It's incredible. And I think all of us have asked the question, when do consumers begin to finally push back and say, no more? We can't pay this. And we've all been worried about demand destruction, where ultimately prices get so high, consumers switch and permanently change to a different product. But that hasn't happened. We just set another new retail record in September, $5.92, broiler composite, about a $1.97. Okay, so roughly beef is now trading at 3 times the value of poultry. And so we have obviously continued to have an incredible pricing power and pricing advantage despite kind of all of our misgivings of that occurrence over time. And what's really amazing about that is that we are still in the midst of an economy that's chugging along, having trouble. We have consumers that are challenged out there still it's in the aftermath of the financial crisis. And I love this, you can't see it, something happened to the slide here, but ultimately changing consumer behavior, pre versus post-recession behavior, okay? And shoppers who agree with the statement about have they adapted, are they shopping for more specials, and are they accustomed to doing less, or settling for less? And what's amazing in all of those cases about we'll exhibit that behavior going forward, they agree. And what's most frustrating in that, in general, in terms of consumers, is about 55% of us say, yeah, we exhibit that behavior going forward of settling for less. In other words, we've been somewhat complacent consumers out there. That is exactly contrary to what we're seeing in terms of pricing power on the beef side. Despite this overriding concern among consumers, beef continues to have pricing power. So if we look at total spending, because that's really all that matters, total spending at the consumer level, that's the number of dollars coming into our business. Since 1998, beef spending has gone up $109. Pork and poultry, about $90 combined. So remember that 11-to-1 pork and poultry beats beef? Now it's beef beating pork and poultry. We have reversed it. And we've gone from about a 37% market share. Now we're getting closer to 45, 46, even 48. We've touched up there to where we're getting almost half of every dollar spent on protein. Something's changed. It's quality. It really matters. And that directly impacts what goes on in our business. A lot of times as we talk about consumers, it can seem sort of downstream, too far, it doesn't matter. Well, if you look at what they spend versus what the market does, real dollars coming back, okay? I wish I had a pointer, but if you look at terms of per capita spending and where they were in terms of 86 to 98, down there on the left-hand side, lower corner, and then we kind of go through 11-year period, 99 through 2010, and then the last couple of years, 2011, 2012, 2013, all that time where we're worried about retail prices, and look what the market's done. That's an incredible relationship. So the more we can meet the consumer's needs, the better they spend, the better it is for our markets. Sure, some people would argue some of that's demand, but I mean supply driven, but that is a demand function right there. Ultimately, happier consumers, promoters, spend more, it means more total dollars coming into our business. And what's happened to that? It's a real effect in terms of our fed cattle market. Okay, and you know, just 2 weeks ago, I've got it in here. We scored about $170 on select set of cattle. We've more than doubled the value of fed cattle in the last 5 years. We're not even to December 2014, so since December 2009, the last low, and we've doubled the value of fed cattle in 5 years. Think about where we were from July 5th or January 5th through that time frame, flat, and I could take it back even further. We didn't get much upside. Now, the other challenge in this is there's more capital at risk all the time. But this is how you grow businesses. This is how Tom Field talked about, how do we get young people back into business? You've got to have more revenue coming in and creating opportunities for entrepreneurialism. So it's a great story. It's a wonderful story. I don't know if there is a better turnaround story out there. It's funny to me, someone earlier this morning talked about IBM, and if any of you have read the book by Lou Gerstner, who came in to be their CEO, who said, who says elephants can't dance, right? I did an article on that theme, kind of a play off of that. It said, who said cattle can't dance? What an incredible turnaround story that continues to endure, and really what instills that level of confidence that we're beginning to feel in this business. Now, with that said, it feels good, but on the flip side of that, I think we've heard it several times, we can't get complacent, because that's a source of risk, right? This is not a Goldilocks, ends happily ever after, we close the book, shut it, and it goes away. Business is competitive. Business is tough. We can never stop innovating. We can never stop pushing forward, kind of having, we talked about earlier today, that word grit and continuing to compete. And so probably, and everywhere I go, I typically use this slide. My favorite business book of all time is a book called Built to Last. And many of you know Jim Collins by name. You've probably read a book or heard of it called Good to Great. This was Jim Collins' first book, Built to Last. I think it's his best by far and away. But he puts in there this great concept of these companies that have succeeded and established a foundation that were built to last. And one of those things that he talks about is that you always got this tension, but you've got to preserve the core, and then you've got to stimulate progress. And so what the beef industry is doing right now is really great. And we need to preserve that core, but at the same time, we've got to continue to stimulate progress, continue to become more competitive. And what he writes in there, he says, if a business or if an industry is to meet the challenges of a changing world, and our world is changing very rapidly, it must be prepared to change everything about itself except its basic beliefs. So we have to be ready for that all the time. And so he also talks about, no pun intended, right? The only sacred cow in an organization should be its basic philosophy of doing business. So we may have to be ready to continue to reinvent ourselves to meet a consumer out there who can be pretty fickle at times. And so ultimately, I just appreciate that Tom Field had that term up there, complacency, because I have it in my slide, and we didn't talk about that at all, right? And I've sat back here this afternoon and visited a little with Chuck Schroeder, who you're going to hear from later today. But he made a quote in 2000 that I think is just so true, right? And it holds true today. If we don't take advantage of becoming customer-oriented, we'll just be one more generation that missed the opportunity. What's he talking about? He's talking to entrepreneurs, all of us in this business being entrepreneurial. The food business climate is one of impatient customers and aggressive marketers. What you decide here will determine the direction the industry takes. So true. What a great, great story that we have. It's a story of success. It's a story of response to markets. It's a story of dedication and commitment that ultimately beef producers have done to turn this business around, because we still could be stuck back in that 80 to 1998 type of a period. But we can't lose focus, right? The game continues to get played, and we need to continue to press on.
Let's thank Nevil for his presentation.
Great. Thank you.